Marlow FM 97.5.
When you hear someone speaking in a fascinating, compelling way, did you ever wonder, how did they find their voice? Well, listen in on Mondays, 2 to 3, where Stacia uncovers the story behind the scenes and has conversations with guests who found their voice. We'll discover how they found their voice, what experience taught them, things they wish people would have told them, and how you can find your voice too. Here we are, Monday from 2 to 3 with me, Stacia Keogh, and the second show of the year, Finding My Voice. And today I have a very special person on who used to be part of the Marlow FM team, and that's none other than Wisdom Da Costa. What a fabulous name. I'm going to be asking him about that name as well. And he is a voice for justice, which led him from being in accountancy to finding a seat on the council, working with the Treasury, and now giving voice to issues of ecological and equality in the community. So welcome to the second in the series of conversations with me, Stacia Keogh, and guests who are finding their voice and helping others find theirs. I always love getting the story behind the scenes. It's something I've been fascinated with forever, and I've done a lot of different shows focusing on just that. But now I'm going to be telling you or giving you opportunities to hear stories from how people found that voice and the courage and the passion to step up out of the shadows into the limelight and really speak to what they feel is most important about. So if you have questions or comments, I'd love to hear from you. You can contact us here at the station. Email studio@marlowfm.co.uk. You can also text on 07900 975 975. Check us out on social media. We're all over Facebook, Twitter, Instagram. @Marlow FM is our handle. You can join the conversation or visit our website, marlowfm.co.uk, where you can see what programs are featuring, listen live, or listen again for up to 2 weeks from broadcast. So today's conversation, as I said, is going to be with a man of many talents. He used to be a presenter here at Marlow FM, Wisdom Da Costa. He's been a teacher. He's also been a business owner and an accountant. So he has his position with the city treasury. And while he was there, he's also had senior positions in financial direction and got his seat on the council. And while he was there, he was trying to accomplish what others said that they wanted to do. But he found his voice by using it to enact policies and procedures to ensure plastics are eliminated and social justice becomes more than just a talking point, which I applaud you for, because people say a lot of stuff, but then it's like, how are you going to do something about that? Which is where you come into with policies that are actually an action plan, which is exciting. So welcome, Wisdom. I'm really happy to have you here.
Thank you, and welcome, not welcome, hello, sorry. Hello to you, Stacia, and to all the listeners at Marlow FM. I'm so glad to be back on the show. It's been a long time since I helped Dermot Fitzpatrick and also helped present the chart show, which was fun.
I want to just get a little bit of a background story on you. What is your background story? Because you've had quite a journey, and how, that story really forms your voice. You came from specialized in tax and treasury accounting, and found your way to the city council. So, but you're local. You're kind of a local boy, aren't you? Slough.
Yes, if you consider Slough local, absolutely. I grew up in Slough. I actually came to England when I was 5 years old. I was born in Africa, in Nairobi. Obviously, part of an immigrant family in Nairobi, and again, an immigrant here into the UK. My family from a place called Goa, and my father sort of brought us over to the UK to give us a better education. So I grew up in Slough, went to Slough Grammar School, went off to university at Newcastle to biochemistry there, a few years over in Belfast with Touche Ross, and then back to the UK. So yeah, pretty much have lived in the Thames Valley for most of my life.
Right. So, and then I thought that was interesting because you also spent some time teaching, science. So when you come at these issues of ecology and that, it's like you definitely do follow the science.
Well, absolutely. I mean, I think science is a wonderful topic. I think as a Christian, I just look up at the stars. I'm always in awe. And so one of the good things about lockdown is that I've been able to go away and look a little bit more. It's a great guy called Richard Feynman. He's now dead, but an amazing professor, an amazing educator. He communicates some of the really difficult things like quantum gravity, quantum physics in a very simple way, which is what I need, simple. So it's been a great chance to sort of learn more about this amazing world we live in. My background was biochemistry. I was in the early days of cloning technology. Cloning isn't about making a human being or making a new creature. It's more about that taking a piece of DNA and putting it into the DNA of another organism. I know that sounds horrific to some people, but that was my early days.
But that's fascinating. I think science is unique in that it explains how the world works. How does this happen? How does that go about? That's why people I think are really fascinated with, David Attenborough, because he shows you it and then he says this is why and this is what is happening, and it's little things that we don't even notice and take for granted, and then when something like a coronavirus hits or global warming comes about, and we think, how did that happen? And you're like, well, this is how it happens. And there's always something we can actually learn, not just learn from it, but do something about.
Yeah, I think there's two aspects to science. The first is the discovery part. So you go out there and find out, well, what's there? And then you create a hypothesis and then you try and test that hypothesis. And actually, when we talk about laws, actually, there's no such thing as a law, because whenever somebody writes a law, for example, Darwin's theory of evolution is still just a theory. And those theories are always being either proven wrong or corrected. That's the principle of science. And that process of discovery is a wonderful, wonderful process. It's also time consuming. And I love David Attenborough's shows, which actually then explain the discoveries, what we do know. And there's so much more that we don't know, which we're still trying to discover. Dark matter, dark energy, so much more.
Absolutely, absolutely. And I like that because we talk about standing on the shoulders of giants, but the people that are true scientists will say, I've only brought it this far. There are people that are bringing it further, and so we want to continue that conversation because it's always about learning more and improving upon what we have and improving our knowledge. So, what led you into the accounting, especially with the tax accounting and into the Treasury and that?
I think you might say I'm a failed scientist. Whilst I did reasonably well at Newcastle, I couldn't get a place. I couldn't get a PhD seat. So I thought I'd do something else which would give me a lot of flexibility. And accountancy really does do that. But it is for a certain type of person, I think. So accountancy, because it gave me an opportunity to look in lots of different businesses and then choose a business line to go into sooner or later.
I like that you say that, because getting into the gubbins and the guts of somebody else's business and seeing the balance sheet and what makes it flow and what makes it prosper. I mean, then you really understand a lot more about how business is done and how successes are made. So how did you find that shaping your voice? Because you yourself were a business owner for some time. You had your own firm.
I still am a business owner.
Yeah.
Rumors of my death have been greatly exaggerated, as Oscar Wilde would say. It's fascinating, and it's a great privilege to be able to sort of see people's businesses and to see what they're doing. Everybody has great skill sets, amazing things. We put ourselves down and everybody does something amazing, and I love looking at that, the things they're doing well, and from my perspective then learning from that, incorporating it in what I do and helping others with those sort of similar best practices.
And then how did this lead to the city council? Because that's kind of a leap, and actually we're trying to get more people that, to get involved in politics and government so that we have some real people there. So how did you find your way to a seat on the council?
You raised a really, really interesting point. I think from one of the things I've learned from my time in politics is that, democracy doesn't end at the ballot box. It starts with your vote, but it continues with your involvement. Your involvement after you voted is really important in society with a political group, because if you don't say what you think and you've got something very valuable to say, every single listener out there has, then the minority of people who think they know best, and they usually don't, are going to be the ones who are forming those policies and engaging with others. So I absolutely agree with that everybody out there, just listen to this, get out there, get involved. You are needed to help shape the future.
Absolutely.
Keep going. But how do I get involved?
Yeah.
Sorry, carry on.
Yeah, no,
Okay.
how did you, what was the flashpoint for you?
Again, it's kind of like, it was a bit of chance more than anything else. So I got married to my lovely wife, Carol, and we moved over here she was already living in Windsor, so I moved to Windsor. Then one of the things I always do, even in my work as an accountant, whether it's to individual businesses or to individual people, and even as a teenager growing up, it was recognizing that you want to help people, add some value back. And so that's exactly what I did. I joined a local residents association called the West Windsor Resident Association and started to help them. So they gave me the task of dealing with their website. So I created their website. And then after a couple of years, the former chairman, amazing guy called John Holdstock, he taught me a lot about managing meetings. And I think his favorite phrase was, "I put it to you," which came in very useful in a very controversial meeting in front of a TV many years later. So he resigned. He effectively retired. He's still doing tons of work in the community, which is, again, some amazing people in Windsor. And so I went to see him and said, "Why have you resigned?" And he said, "Well, thank you for coming and volunteering to be chairman." So I ended up as chairman of the West Windsor Resident Association. After a year or so, in fact, it wasn't even after a year, it was after literally just a couple of months, one of our very long-standing and well-loved councillors, Cynthia Endicott, she passed away. So like a good chairman, I prepared my short list of candidates and went around to interview all of the candidates. They all said, "No, thank you. You do it." So I was the last person left. In fact, I wasn't even on the short list. I didn't make the cut. So it was left to me really to step forward and to take up that mantle, which, as you rightly said, we stand on the shoulders of others, of giants. We build from what previous generations have done, and we just and that's our job. It's our role, is to make things better. So that's how it all happened. So I was voted in. It was quite a convincing victory, and we've had a few ups and downs in council. But that was the start of representing people and helping people in a different arena or through a different method. So rather than taking meals on wheels around to see people, rather than sort of helping them with their bins or helping them with tax, this time it's helping to try and make sure that policy and services delivered by council take account of the individuals in my community, in my constituency.
Yeah, no, I love that. What you said is like your role in politics doesn't stop at the ballot box. You know, you really need to continue to add your voice and to continue to play an active part. I think people feel a lot of times like, oh, they don't really have a voice. They don't really count. So many people are apathetic even about voting that it's been, I think, with the turn of events that's happened all across the world in governments on the world stage, I think people are really getting now the seriousness of, who we put in those positions of power has a direct effect on our lives, and they don't necessarily know better just because they graduated from such and such school or have so much X amount of money, that we really need to put people in that place that are, we talk about leadership styles changing, so service leadership and legacy leadership, people that are there to serve. And I for one, did some work with an organization called GovUK, and they were looking at, they had a program about fair work. And I went on their website and looked at what they did, and then I was like, but this isn't really explaining what they do. And so just in doing a quick Google search, what is democracy, it really turned it around, because democracy is actually the people tell the government what kind of world we want to live in. And then the government tells the marketplace, this is the world we're going to create, so these are the rules. But now it's all completely backwards, where the marketplace is telling the government and the government tells the people. And we've just accepted it for so long that we don't realize that it's our voice. We're the ones that are supposed to be telling them.
Yeah, I mean, there is a large aspect of that is that technology is here, and it's got its upsides and its downsides. But the good thing about technology is the creating of meeting places like Facebook and social media. And I know there are many detractors saying that, you hear only the voice you want to hear. But equally, on many chat sites, it gives people the chance to discuss things. It's a real pity that some people get a bit nasty about it, but you have to be quite thick-skinned sometimes. And certainly I've learned to be thick-skinned. And, you've got to remember that whilst you may see a nasty comment, there are a lot of other people seeing what you're saying and saying, yeah, we agree, but they don't want to say it. So technology has been really good from that point of view as a leveling of the playing field in terms of engaging and communicating with others. It's not the be all and end all, of course not, because there are a lot of people who still don't have that technology. But it is important that people get informed and they do get in contact with their councillors and their MPs, although MPs tend to be a little bit more distant in many places. And I don't just mean get in contact with them to say hello and press the flesh, as Nixon would say, and do a smiling sort of bit. No, I mean, you tell them your issues, tell them what's going on, ask them for help, and getting them to represent your local community. I think going back to the issue of your responsibility doesn't just end at the ballot box. It doesn't. Get involved, talk to them. And if you don't like what they say, if overall they don't listen to anybody, then you know what to do at the ballot box next time. Not just vote for someone else, but to ask others to vote for other people. Yeah. But I would say is that, remember, we're all in this together, so just be kind to each other. Don't get too nasty at all.
Yeah, I think that's just, the general respect, the rule of just respect people whose opinion you might not agree with, has come from a different set of experiential, factors that have made them the way that they are. So I think everybody really, one thing about social media, I mean, it's a bit of a squawk box, but it only goes to show people want to be listened to. They do want to be heard. And listening to someone, holding space for someone so that they can speak is in itself an act of kindness. Because we talk even now, I had Shamina Rabi on last week about unlocking language and about the isolation that the pandemics have created, because we're not getting to, meet other people in casual conversation. So we really do have to make that effort to reach out to people, to find ways to communicate, and people are. But that also brings me to the point of people realizing the power that something like a town hall meeting or the meetings and the where they put things out and say, this is planning permission has been asked for. This is your window to say yes or no about it. And, if people let that fly by, but if they use that window, they really do have the power to affect change, don't they?
They do and they don't. I think because when you get to that point of a planning application, you're already 80-90% down the path of a decision. So people need to get involved at a much earlier stage. And that's not when the planning application hits. It's long before then. I'll tell you why. When you look at the planning applications, they are decided not on who shouts loudest, although, believe me, that does help. Politicians who are interested in only votes, if lots of you get together and you have a rent-a-mob, they're going to take notice. So practically that is the way it works in part. But the bigger issue is that planning applications, and you have to listen very carefully, and I know it's a bit boring, but you have to listen. Planning applications are based on rules, and the rules are set out, one, at the national level, and the important bit is next is that they're set out at a local level. So you've got to get involved in setting the rules. Once you've set the rules, then people have to follow them. So those rules locally are what is called a local plan or a borough local plan. And these come along every 5 to 10 years or so. So when the opportunity is there, you have to jump on it and say, actually, no, that's not the vision I have for my town or for my region. I don't want it to be a free for all. I want it to have clear parameters in terms of health, well-being, biodiversity, the use of nature and natural capital. So it's a little bit detailed, but you have to be involved at those stages. Then you're right, there is still a role to play. It is a rent-a-mob role when you get to a planning application, but that's a bit more likely to go in the way of the developers who've probably spent a lot of time making sure they fit in with the rules, usually. But yes, you're right, get out there. If you don't have your say, no one will ever know.
Yeah, no, I just remember it was years ago, and it was with Summerlee's wanting to buy First Platte, that ground there, and turn it into whatever, develop it. And that man had been on a school governor with no children at that school for years and years and years, and it had been giving them money and money and money. And then he made this, like, you know, kind of Cinderella mirage-y deal. It's like, if you give me that, I'll build you this new school over there, and I'm going to donate like £1 million. And it was like, you know, you could just see the glowing, you know, going on.
Absolutely.
But then,
oh, aren't you wonderful?
Yeah, and then the parents, when they started saying this, they stood up and said, wait a minute, no. Because my older child, this is our neighborhood, my older child walks our two younger ones to school. And how is that going to work? And you're asking them, that our kids that walk to school, to walk all the way over to that neighborhood, which isn't our neighborhood and is way in some industrial wasteland. That's not where we want to be. And, you know, they said, oh, but did you see the plans for the school with the plate glass windows? It's like, yeah, in an architect's dream, but you ever teach in one of those classrooms? Let's talk about some more science, like solar gain and how you can't see the smartboard with that sun coming in and it's really hot, and, you know, so on and so forth. And so we started asking questions like, well, yeah, we do need to improve the building, but has anyone else been asked to put a tender forward? No? Oh. You know, and we just kept asking the questions, and then people showed up, and I think it was a record 15 minutes before it was thrown out, and it was never seen again.
Yes, I think if everybody made that sort of investment to, you know, the parents, they did it because they were threatened, there was a need, and that was absolutely right for them to do so. I think if more people made that investment more often, overall things would get better. It'll take a while, but they will get better for our children and maybe for their generation.
I want to just go back to something that you were saying earlier about you set the rules at this local level. And it's almost a trickle-up effect as well, because then, again, you get this groundswell of like going, we are all agreed that this is the way we want to live, and this is the kind of society we want to live in. And in this year, in the wake of George Floyd's horrific execution that, you know, everybody around the world witnessed in real time, on the streets of America, it seemed to highlight racist practices everywhere. And certainly in this country, people took to the streets and statues were pulled down, and it was pointed out, wait a minute, we know where they got their money. Wait a minute, we know why this building is named this thing. And so in our own corner of the world, we needed to take a look into, and you were really quite leading the charge on that. Can you tell us about your involvement with the pro-equality and anti-racism motion that you sponsored just this autumn?
Yeah, my involvement with that, again, was a little bit of an accident and a bit of a conscience, something tugging at my heartstrings. What happened was that I'm a great believer in democracy. As you know, I tell people that democracy doesn't end at the ballot box. You've got to get involved after that. And so I was looking at, how can you make democracy more representative? So representative of the people around you and their needs, and give them a voice in doing so. So one of the exercises I did, I looked at the complexion, the ethnicity of local councillors compared to the ONS data, Office for National Statistics, the data on population and demography. And I was a little bit surprised. So the first surprise was that Asians tend to be overrepresented. There are more Asians than the percentage of the population. White people, and please, guys, don't misunderstand when I use these terms. I'm not being racist. I'm just using a label to help people understand. But if I've got it wrong, tell me, because that's the only way I'll know. So white people were slightly underrepresented. And when you looked at it more, the underrepresentation seemed to be a class sort of issue. So even within the white people being underrepresented, the wealthy and the retired who got enough money were overrepresented. And if you like, your single mother was pretty much and was very underrepresented. And then the thing that really made me fall off my chair was that black people are just completely underrepresented. And I thought, well, maybe I've got this wrong. Let's go and look across all of the different local councils in the area, in the region. And no, the story was exactly the same, with the exception of one council black people are completely underrepresented, and that statistic, which I looked at again, revisited the calculations once when George Floyd was killed, is getting worse. It's getting worse. So as a consequence of that, I thought, well, look, we better stand up and say something about this, because there was a motion going through which referenced Black Lives Matter, but it had nothing to do about reversing the wrongs of the past or helping with greater levels of equality. So that was sort of how I came at it, or how I started in. So we got the Conservatives, Ross McWilliams, to his credit, said, yes, let's get together. And a Liberal Democrat called Amy Tizzy, the three of us, plus Stuart Carroll, we got together to draft the motion. We spent a lot of time kicking this back and forth. And the substantive aspects of the motion, so the bits that talk about the practicalities, we were really thrilled that they were pretty much in line with a report by the Baroness Doreen Lawrence, who's the mother of Stephen Lawrence, who, remember, was murdered by a group of white young men many years ago. So she's put forward a report, and that came out. It's called. Let me just double check what it was called. An Avoidable Crisis is what it was called. And I'm really happy to say that most of the substantive aspects of the motion she is proposing, the things that have to change to reduce racism, which still exist in society, were the same as the ones that we put forward. So that went through on the 27th of October. But that's just the first part of the sort of battle, the struggle. It's all very well having a motion, but now you've got to get the council to actually do something about the motion in a very effective manner.
I agree. And I mean, your motion, which looks at systemic racism, as does Doreen Lawrence's report, it also highlights the inequalities in health provision. I mean, people are saying, one of the things that has come out is like, people from the Black community, they're more susceptible. It's like, I don't think anybody's more susceptible to a virus than anybody else. What's happening is that there's a disproportionate number of people from that community, from the BAM community, that are frontline workers. There are cleaners, there are, rubbish collectors, there are supply chain workers, there are drivers, they're out there all the time. And they are also, because they have different cultural systems, they live in extended family homes, not as much space as other people, so there are other factors that have to do with it that people aren't taking into consideration. So, I mean, obviously, you've put this motion forward. What are some of the action points that this motion highlights?
The action points are sort of broadly grouped into three areas, and the reason they're grouped into three areas is fundamentally because of the strictures, how we were constrained by the way in which we're told council motions should be presented. So we've been forced to put it into three areas. The first one is to do with finding out whether there is a problem. So getting data on various aspects of ethnicity, and reporting them on an annual basis. Unbelievably, we don't have them reported on an annual basis. But first thing we'll be doing is saying, let's get the data and report it on an annual basis, because if you can see there's an issue, you can then go and find out if there is a problem behind it and take steps to deal with it. So that was the first aspect. And interestingly, for me, on this first aspect, it's a case of, well, we've been trying at this for decades. We had the Equalities Act in 2010. Before that, we had different commissions. So we've been trying to reduce these disparities between whites and non-whites for a long time, but we've still got them. So maybe the data we're looking at, if you like, the telltale signals, we're not looking at the right one. So I suppose that here's a call to action, is really a case of, well, what experience have people had out there of identifying the fingerprint of institutional racism? So how do you know it's there? So if people have got that information, then please come and talk to me, because once you've got the information, then you can take action. So that's the first step. First action point. Find data, report on data, and then do something about it. The second action point was around education. So we've all bought into this narrative, and actually George Monbiot in one of his videos talks about, I'll read his script. He's given me permission, by the way. So in order to justify the land-grabbing colonial projects, you had to create an ideology. We Europeans or Americans have come to the rescue of the world, to rescue the world from its depravity and backwardness. But in order to do that, you have to be able to demonstrate that the rest of the world is depraved and backward. So that narrative, which arose in the 1800s to 1700s, is still with us today, because it's been going on for hundreds of years. And so we believe it. And I believe it, because I bought in, and I still buy into the British culture. I consider myself a brown British. But we have to reverse that, because it's not true. We are equal. We're not better or worse than anyone else. You can't justify that anymore. So that's the issue of education. So some of the key points with the education are, for example, did you know that, look, I'm not putting down the British Empire. As one of my counsellors says, they've done a lot of good things, yeah, but we also did a lot of bad things. And one of amongst the bad things, I'll give you three, which George Monbiot again talks about. First is that there was a famine in the 19th century in India. And this famine was completely, didn't need to be there because there was more than enough food. But Lord Lytton, who was the Viceroy of India, he said all this food has to go back to the UK. And in the UK, they can commodify it, marketize it, make a profit on it. The consequence of it is that there was no food left in India. And they say the arguments are that between 12 and 29 million people died because of that famine. That's an unimaginable number.
Yeah, I mean, it's an economic famine, and that's what they created in Ireland as well. So,
exactly, Ireland. If you look at what's happened in Nairobi in Kenya, where I come from, with the Kikuyu people, you can go on and on and on. And we're not here to sort of say we're bad, but we are saying, listen, we've got to get the truth right.
Yes.
We can't just look upon the British Empire as something fantastic which did everything perfectly. We've got to recognize we made mistakes. And once you recognize you made mistakes, and once you recognize that all people are actually equal, that this color of your skin is completely irrelevant, then you can start to say, okay, let's change things and work together.
Yeah, I think that's the first step is the awareness and the acknowledgement, and I think unmasking people that I think this is why the pulling down of statues that have been glorified because of their economic contributions. And as a person, I worked at Kew Gardens for a couple of years, and the home of economic botany, which supported plantations all over the world. And it was, in fact, the Mutiny on the Bounty was really all about going to Tahiti to get breadfruit plants because they were a cheap, renewable source of protein to feed the slave labor in, the Bahamas and in Jamaica and so forth. So, yeah.
I want to just tell residents, because you may say, okay, well, 12 million people died. Well, so what? Well, when we look at what happened to the Kikuyu, they were herded. This is 1 million odd people who were herded in concentration camps, like fortified villages, and they were systematically tortured to death. They invented a new type of pliers whose purposes were first to crush a man's testicles, then to cut them off. They raped women with bayonets. Can you understand that? They raped women with bayonets. They raped men and women anally by ramming sand up their backsides and then ramming it up with a stick until their internals were ruptured and they bled to death. This is what we did. We'd wrap people up in barbed wire and kick them around the compound or the military compound until they bleed to death. So this is shocking, and I'm sorry to say it, but it makes my heart cry, which is why we have to stand up and really do something, correct this. We're in this together. Climate change, we're all in it together. So let's make sure all of the past is resolved.
I think it's just acknowledging that happened is a first step. towards anything, because Brian Stevenson, who is a civil rights lawyer in the States, he works in he's formed a charity called the Equal Justice Initiative, and he works with the condemned and those who are, and especially children who have been sentenced to die in prison, so life in prison without parole, and tried as adults at 13. So he's worked with these people since the 80s, and he put together a museum that was, an African history museum, so that we could really tell history from a different perspective, from what it was from that perspective, and tell it truly, instead of kind of whitewash it over with so many, just fallacies of like that. Actually wasn't the experience that those people had of slavery. It wasn't like, they worked on a plantation and they just didn't get paid. It was a lot more going on than that. And one of the wings that, and especially we forget about this in American history, is the reign of terror that happened after the Civil War, because just recently with the whole furore that's gone on, the coup that's gone on in the States, they kept trying to invoke this, the 1877 agreement. And what that did was they decided who the president was, and they threw out the election, and that ushered in the end of Reconstruction and the beginning of Jim Crow, where each state decided.
Jim Crow laws,
yeah. So, I mean, if you don't know that history, and you don't know what they're talking about, and you don't understand, where that's coming from, then it's really easy to get swept along and have a lot of, a story with no fact. It's called a confabulation, and it's really easy because we need story. We need to make sense of what's going on, and if we don't have the real story, we make one up.
We do, absolutely, yeah.
So
it's very interesting that we need a narrative which adds structure and therefore direction to the way we live. And if you say the wrong narrative, then you're going to be completely guided in the wrong direction.
Exactly. Well, we look to these stories and to history to give us some cultural reference points, some ground orientation for, well, where have we been? What have we done? And where do we go now? And I think this is, we can see things played out and we can understand it. I think my favorite scene in the world that kind of describes all this is in Bug's Life at the end, where you got Flick, who's always going, why are we doing all this? We can save so much time, and then we have time to enjoy each other's company and the world we live in. And they're like, not now, Flick, we got to collect food. And so all through the movie, this is going on because they have to appease the grasshoppers, the ruling class. And at the end of the movie, there's a scene where Hopper, the main grasshopper, stands up and he says, this is how it's always been. And Flick picks himself up off the floor and he goes, wait a minute, what you're saying isn't true. We're not the weaker ones. We're really strong. We ants carry like 500 times our body weight. We build cities out of sand. We collect food for ourselves and you don't even eat that food. And there's more of us than you, and you know it too. And I think creating those derisions is, divide and conquer. That's been since Roman times, hasn't it?
Oh, it's a great political ploy to actually divide a grouping, and then you see, as soon as you divided a grouping, then they will attack each other internally, and then you've won the battle. You didn't have to lift the finger. Absolutely. Absolutely.
So, let's talk about some other things that you're involved with as well, because your remit is quite wide and varied. You really are listening to people in.
Yeah, sorry. Can I just finish on the things we're doing? Sorry about that. So, education is really important. So, we're looking at the people who've got lesson plans, and this has got to be not just for children, because they are probably more with the idea of equality and have less encumbered by the narrative that people in their 40s and 50s and 60s are. So we need education resources for and installations, artworks, videos for people who are grown up. So people in their 40s, 50s and 60s and above, to actually show them, actually, do you know what? Would you have done this differently if you knew? This is what the reality of slavery is, of colonial history is. So let's think again. I love the word "rethink" again, because people misunderstand the book of Jesus when he said repent. He actually would say, think again, guys, think again. Have you got it right? So that's the second part in terms of education. People talk a lot about unconscious bias training, and it's a tricky one because I've done some unconscious bias training, and it is useful, there's no doubt, but it doesn't deal with the issue, I don't think, of racism, because if you're checking yourself and you're not aware of your own bias, you're never going to deal with your own bias. So we need something else aside of unconscious bias to help people with understanding the racist attitudes they have in their own lives. And so if people know what those are, please come and talk to me. What is the best practice nowadays? And then finally, the final aspect was to hold a conference in Windsor and Maidenhead to share best practice. So people will be invited, everyone's allowed to come along. And at this conference, we're going to be talking about, well, what's your experience? What's worked for you and what hasn't worked for you? And then coming out of that, really just recognizing what people of colour have done, how they've added value to the British society locally over the last 100, 200, 300 years. And actually, it's really surprising when you find out more of these stories about what people have actually done. There was a mayor in Windsor who was black, and that mayor actually was mayor when one of the kings died, and that sets up a tradition that if a king dies during the reign of a mayor, or the queen dies during the reign of a mayor, that mayor is made a lord. So there you go.
Fantastic. And I mean, now we have Shondaland, who's given us Bridgerton, and we're looking at like Queen Charlotte, and people are going,
correct,
how come she was cast as black? But if you look back, it's like, actually, she was biracial. That was her heritage, and but who knew, because that's not taught either. It's like,
correct. Yeah.
So I agree with this. So just to recap, so first you gather the information, and then the second phase is to look at education. Is that right? Yep. And then it's to get more input into, how are these things, and then to really get some materials out together and come together and talk about it.
Yep.
Love it. Love it.
So those are the three key phases. And obviously, when we talk about many of the other things that Baroness Lawrence talks about in terms of the institutional sort of bias, when we look at the education, the health inequalities, then those will come out of the stats that we're looking at on an annual basis. So some of those other things will hopefully be addressed after a number of years. But I'm really clear that we need people to step up. Today it's my turn. Tomorrow it's your turn. To step in there and say, okay, what are the stats? Are the council doing anything about it? Or are they just saying, that's interesting, and moving on to the next topic, or having a great long debate, which effectively then ends up in doing nothing. These are typical tricks of politicians.
Absolutely. Well, I love that you have like this action plan, and it's just down to all of us to work with you to hold people responsible and get this going. So I'm really glad that we explore that a little further then. And so I want to talk about the other, the ecological issue that you had motions for as well. And that's about environment and climate strategy. And so we all know that, plastic bags, they've been going their way, but there's more to it than just plastic bags, isn't there?
Yeah, I think most people are probably now aware that the climate is changing. We've already had last year one of the hottest 2 years ever. And the prediction, which is not just meeting predictions from 10 years ago from the Met Office and others, is that England will become hotter, have hotter spells, but also have more precipitation, i.e. a lot more rain and flooding. And we're seeing both of those. But the frightening thing is that what we're seeing is above our predictions. So it looks as if climate change is accelerating, and so things will get worse around the world. There will be more flooding, more droughts, and there'll be more hot days. In England, 40 degrees is probably going to become the norm for a summer. And so that sort of leads us to all sorts of questions like, have we prepared for that? Do our planning regulations force us to deal with, to put in place, building standards that allow people who live in the buildings to be able to cope with extended periods of rain, to be able to cope with infrastructure being washed out, to be able to cope with extreme heat? Because when you get extreme heat, air pollution increases, people die. So that there were lots of these issues which are happening. So again, this is going to be a multi-level way of doing things. Yes, as individuals, we can take steps. I've actually created a game which I've not launched, but just shows people a series of steps they can simply take. I call it the climate change game, which they can just take those individual steps and they know that they're on the path to becoming carbon neutral themselves. And it wouldn't it be great if we could have everyone playing the game and competing with one another to see, who can become carbon neutral the first. But we do have to take steps and actions ourselves, both for biodiversity and to reduce our carbon footprint. But we've also got to be pushing government. I don't think government's done enough. We could have already said that let's reduce our carbon footprint to zero by 2030. Because in reality, if we don't, then we will exceed all of the the emission standards. That basically means the world's weather systems will become even more volatile. And we don't really want that to happen. And then issues of biodiversity, we can do things to help enhance biodiversity, even in our own gardens. So there's lots of things we can do. So we need to do that, hold councils to account. I'm sorry to say this, any officers and councillors from Rural Borough, Windsor and Maidenhead, but I think our strategy is not good enough. And I don't think we're taking it seriously enough, because we need to be able to mobilise businesses, mobilise ordinary residents to help them do even more.
And you're working with scientists from University of Reading and Natural England and DEFRA, and so you've actually created some strategies for the borough. You've got your game, we've got our compost boxes that we put out now for RBWM, and we've got the garden waste, all of that stuff. But I also feel. Agree with you. It's like too little, too late. This is a small step forward, but so much more needs to be done. So, what kind of strategies are you coming up with the different organizations that you're working with?
I think for me, there are lots of great groups out there already on Facebook, like the Wild groups, Wild Maidenhead, Wild Cookham. And for people who want to sort of take local action to help with biodiversity, go and join those groups. There's also groups like the RBWM Climate Emergency Coalition on Facebook. Again, go and join those groups, and they'll be giving you lots of ideas of what to do and how to do it. If I was to look at the key points for residents in terms of becoming climate zero, I'd say the first thing is you've got to change your vehicle as soon as you can. Do less journeys if you've got a petrol or diesel vehicle, and try and move to non-diesel and non-petrol as soon as possible. The two biggest areas of climate emissions are the use of transportation, and the second one is the heating of our home. So the other thing you can do in terms of heating your home, I'll just give you just a starter, is to change your tariff to a renewable only tariff. That's the first one. Then you can look at things like having photovoltaic solar cells, panels on your roof, ground heat pumps. There's a local company in Maidenhill called Tipio who are experimenting and are starting to install an electric boiler. And what it basically does is it takes electricity at a cheap rate, heats up a thermal mass, and then stores that. And then when you need hot water, it just passes the water through that thermal mass. Contact Tipio, TEPEO, if you think you might like to have your boiler changed now. So those are two key things: transportation and your boiler. And of course, insulation is important. Keep your heat down a little bit. Put on an extra jumper if you need to. There are lots of little things. Go and join these groups. That'll help you. But then the next thing after you've done that is going to be your diet. So what we need to be doing, because it's 10% of our diet, 10% of climate emissions come from the use of farmland and raising meat, typically beef and pigs and lamb, sheep. So I'm not telling people to become vegetarians, but I am saying you probably don't need as much meat in your diet. It'd be better for you if you'd come off the meat. Not entirely. Clearly, everybody loves their bacon sandwiches. I completely agree. But yeah, switch to a more vegetarian-based diet. That will help significantly. So those are three key things that people can do straight away.
Wonderful. Well, I mean, I'm just so pleased that, we found each other and that I'm learning all the things that, I can do and bring to my listeners that they can do to empower them and to create just a better society for us. So thank you for all the work that you do and all the suggestions that you've given. So I always ask my guests 3 questions. And the first one is, what has experience taught you?
So if I can take the first, I know you haven't said the second question, but can you ask the second question as well?
Yeah, so the 3
please?
questions are, what has experience taught you? What do you wish someone would have told you when you were before now? And how do you find and nurture that creative voice in the face of adversity?
Okay, if I can take those first 2 questions together, because they are sort of related. I think experience tells me people are amazing. People, there's some of the people have issues, but everyone is amazing. So I wish someone has said that to me, say hello to everyone, look them in the eye and say hello, because what comes back can just, it just cuts across your prejudices and stereotypes. When you hear them speaking, you hear what language they like, the accent, you hear the words they choose to use. It's just a window into another world. And so people are amazing, first of all, and do say hello to them. And begin that sort of conversation and dialogue. The second thing I'd say is that the world is not what you think it is. People are not what you think they are. You have a specific presentation in your face. You have a whole bunch of assumptions into how you see the world. So I would say just remember, people are not what you think they are, and the world is not what you think it is. So travel lightly. Don't hold too tightly to anything. And the last thing I would say is, do as much as you can, get as many experiences as you can, as young as you can, because that will just help you understand, again, people and how to negotiate your way in the world and how to get the best out of each other.
And how did you keep your voice, even in the face of adversity, how do you keep your voice strong?
That is a difficult one. I think you have to go away and you have to take time out. You have to sort of understand that you are, you have your limitations. Sometimes you have to go away and recharge, and that's okay. If you step out for a bit of time, someone else will take up that voice, or it will be ready for you to come back to. So yeah, just be good to yourself, take time out, and value people is the biggest thing. I get my energy from people, so that's really important. So time out, rest, recover, and look after people.
Wisdom Da Costa, I think you've given us lots of wisdom to think about. So thank you so much for joining me today on Finding My Voice. Thank you.
Thank you, Stacia.
Okay, bye now.